I was standing at the head of the table when the laughter started. Not loud, just enough to travel. Chairs scraping. Someone whispering my old nickname like it still belonged to me. I felt it land between my shoulders the same way it used to, years ago, when I wore shoes with holes and kept my head down. No one had noticed the room had gone quiet, except them. No one had looked up yet. I hadn't said a word. I was holding the folder they'd all been waiting for, my name printed cleanly on the front. I could have cleared my throat. I could have stopped it right there. Instead, I let the silence stretch. Because in a few seconds, they were going to realize who was standing in front of them, and there would be no way back from that. I grew up in a part of town people pretended not to see. Small houses pressed too close together, paint giving up year after year, the smell of damp clothes that never fully dried. My mother worked nights cleaning offices. My father left early enough that I don't remember the sound of the door closing, only the space he didn't fill after. School was a place I learned early to be careful. Careful with my words, careful with my hands, careful not to need anything. I wore the same jacket through seasons it wasn't meant for. I learned how to tie my shoes in a way that hid the torn sides. Hunger became something I managed quietly, like a private skill. They noticed me anyway. It started small. A laugh when I opened my lunchbox. A comment about the smell of my clothes when I walked past. Then it became names. Nothing creative. Just enough to remind me I didn't belong where they did. Their parents had cars that waited outside after school. Mine didn't. I learned to disappear without leaving. I sat in the back. I finished my work early so no one would talk to me. Teachers liked me because I caused no problems. No one asked why I never joined anything. No one asked where I went after the bell rang. After graduation, we scattered the way people do when they assume life will take care of them. I went straight to work. Any work. Warehouses, night shifts, places where your name didn't matter as long as your hands kept moving. I studied when I could. Late nights, cheap coffee. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones and doesn't ask permission. I didn't carry anger the way people expect. What I carried was memory, and a quiet rule I made with myself. Never depend on anyone who had once enjoyed seeing me small. Years passed. Titles changed. My address changed. My voice changed too, though I didn't notice it happening. It slowed down, became steadier. By the time I walked into that conference room, I hadn't thought about them in years. Or so I believed. It happened on a Tuesday that felt no different from any other. I had been called in early, told there was a department-wide meeting I needed to attend in person. That alone was unusual. Most things at that level were handled through email or brief calls. But I didn't question it. I never had. When I walked into the building, I noticed the shift immediately. People I didn't know nodded at me. Security opened doors without asking for my badge. Someone offered me coffee and used my last name with a respect that still felt slightly mispronounced in their mouth. The conference room was already filling up. Long table, frosted glass walls, a screen at the front with a paused presentation. And then I saw them. 3 faces I hadn't expected to ever see again, sitting together out of habit more than choice. Broader now, better dressed. Familiar in a way that made my chest tighten before my mind caught up. One of them was leaning back in his chair, laughing too loudly. Another was scrolling on his phone, smiling at something private. I took a seat further down, unnoticed. They were talking about the meeting, about the rumor that someone from corporate was coming. One of them joked that it was probably another outsider who didn't understand how things really worked. Another said, "As long as it's not some charity case who climbed up by accident." They laughed, softly, comfortably. I felt something old move inside me. Not anger, not fear, but recognition. The same tone, the same ease with which they reduced people they didn't see as real. Then the director walked in. The room settled. He spoke briefly about restructuring, about accountability, about decisions that would affect everyone in that room. Names were mentioned. Charts appeared on the screen. Futures adjusted in bullet points. Finally, he turned toward me. He said my name clearly, correctly. He asked me to take the floor. I stood. That was the moment. The exact second when the past and present collided without warning. I saw it in their faces before they had time to control it. The confusion first. Then the narrowing of the eyes. Then the quiet, almost embarrassed calculation as memory rushed back faster than pride could stop it. One of them straightened in his chair. Another stopped smiling mid-breath. The third looked down, as if the table might explain things. I didn't acknowledge them. Not with a glance. Not with a pause. I introduced myself the way I had practiced 100 times in other rooms, other cities. I spoke about performance, about standards, about changes that would be implemented immediately. Their department was first on the list. Roles would be reassessed. Leadership positions reviewed. Some contracts would not be renewed. The language was professional, neutral, impossible to argue with. I could feel their attention burning into me now, waiting for something, a look, a sign, some confirmation that this was personal. But it wasn't revenge that brought me there. It was responsibility. And that, somehow, made the silence heavier than anything I could have said. After that meeting, nothing exploded the way people imagine these moments do. There were no confrontations in the hallway, no apologies delivered in shaking voices. What followed was quieter, slower, and harder to escape. They started noticing changes before they understood them. Meetings scheduled with less notice. Reports returned with questions they weren't used to answering. Metrics that had always been good enough suddenly weren't. I watched it happen from a distance I had earned. One of them stopped by my office under the pretense of clarifying a deadline. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, eyes moving around the room. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. "You've done well," he said finally. The words felt rehearsed. I nodded. Nothing more. Another sent an email late at night. Too friendly. Too familiar. He referenced school once, lightly, as if it were a shared joke instead of a shared history. I replied with 2 sentences and an attachment. No emotion. No memory. That's when the pressure began to turn inward for them. Performance reviews came back uneven. Small issues they'd always brushed aside were now documented. A missed deadline here. A compliance oversight there. Nothing unfair. Nothing fabricated. Just written down at last. I could feel their resentment shifting shape. At first, it was disbelief. Then, suspicion. They started watching me the way prey watches a shadow, trying to guess where the danger actually was. One afternoon, I overheard my name in the hallway. Not mocked. Not whispered. Said carefully, with restraint. That was new. At home, I found myself more tired than usual, not from the work, but from the restraint. Every instinct from my childhood told me to stay invisible, to shrink before someone decided I was too much. Now, invisibility was no longer an option. Every decision I made carried weight. Other people's livelihoods rested on my signatures, my silences, my timing. I reminded myself why I was there. Not to settle old scores, not to prove anything. I had built a life on the idea that dignity didn't need witnesses. Still, there were moments, small, human ones, when I felt the pull of the past, like when I saw one of them hesitating before speaking in meetings, choosing words more carefully than he ever had with me, or when another avoided eye contact altogether, as if looking at me too long might collapse the distance he was clinging to. The power had shifted, but not cleanly. They were waiting for a sign, a slip, something that would reveal this was personal, that they could point to and say, "See? This is why." I gave them nothing, and that was what unsettled them most. The decision came down to one meeting. Just one. Late afternoon, when the building had already started to empty, and people were thinking about dinner instead of consequences. Their names were on the agenda. All three. A leadership alignment review, officially. Unofficially, it was the last step. They sat across from me this time. No jokes, no leaning back in chairs, papers laid out neatly, as if order on the table might restore order elsewhere. One of them kept tapping a pen, stopping only when he realized the sound was too loud in the quiet room. I went through the findings slowly, not dramatically. I spoke the way I always did, measured, precise, almost dull. Numbers, missed targets, repeated warnings that had been acknowledged and ignored, patterns that couldn't be explained away anymore. One of them interrupted me, just once. "This feels sudden," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. I looked at him then, really looked. Older than I remembered, lines where confidence used to be. For a moment, I saw the hallway lockers again. The way he used to block my path for no reason at all. "It isn't," I said. "That was all?" I slid the documents across the table. The room seemed to hold its breath as they read. One position terminated effective immediately. One reassigned, demoted, pay adjusted. One placed on a final review period that everyone in that room understood was procedural, not hopeful. They waited. I could feel it. For a speech, for recognition, for me to finally name what this meant between us. Instead, I stood, gathered my folder, adjusted my jacket. "If there are no questions about the process," I said, "this concludes the meeting." No one spoke. As I walked out, I heard a chair scrape softly against the floor. Someone exhaled. Someone else swallowed words they were too late to say. I didn't look back. The door closed behind me with a sound so ordinary it almost felt unreal. But I knew, deep in my chest, that something irreversible had just settled into place. Not for them. For me. After that day, the building returned to its usual rhythm. Emails kept coming. Meetings filled the calendar. People adjusted quickly, the way they always do when someone else's life changes and theirs doesn't. I passed one of them in the parking lot weeks later. He was loading a box into his car. Not a dramatic box, just a cardboard one, slightly bent at the corners. Our eyes met for a second. He nodded. I nodded back. That was the entire exchange. The others disappeared more quietly. New names replaced theirs on org charts. Doors closed. Offices reassigned. The system absorbed the loss without comment. At night, when the noise of the day finally thinned out, I thought about the kid I used to be. The one who learned early how to stay small, how to survive by not asking for space. I realized something then that surprised me. I hadn't done any of this for him. That child didn't need justice. He needed to be believed. And he had been, by the only person who mattered in the end. I never told anyone what those men had been to me. Not before the meeting, not after. Their power over me had lived in my silence once. This time, the silence was mine. Sometimes people assume strength announces itself, that it raises its voice, demands acknowledgement. But the truth I carry is quieter than that. I go to work. I make decisions. I sign my name where it belongs now. And when I think of the past, it doesn't speak back anymore.